Hi, good morning, everyone, and welcome to the second day of the Ruckus Virtual Technical Family Days 2020. My name is Bart Scheffer, and I will be your host today again. And make sure you have a great event and learn, of course, the best and the greatest from Comscope, Ruckus, and Westcon. So, just a little recap on yesterday's session. So yesterday we spoke specifically around your Ruckus Unleashed and the cloud solutions portfolio, and did an introduction of Westcon and Comscope in general, and how we can help you with your projects. So we really hoped that you enjoyed yesterday's event. But for those who weren't in the show, we've just created a short reel for you to get an impression on yesterday's experience. To see, from where in the globe you are.
I am Marian Nickenik, VP Networking and Collaboration at Westcon, and I want to welcome you to our virtual technical family days together with Comscope Ruckus. Our industry-leading suite of tools includes our automated cloud billing platform Blue Sky and PartnerView. Adapting the new normal is a huge challenge and a huge opportunity for the industry. Westcon's relationship with Ruckus started in 2010 with the Sub-Saharan African region. From there, we have grown to a pan-EMEA distributor. With a recent extension to our contract in Europe, we now cover the EMEA region from our offices in Europe, Middle East and South Africa. Ruckus offers Partner a comprehensive range of converged networking solutions.
All right, hi everybody. So I'm Partner Gire and I head up Partner Sales EMEA for Ruckus Comscope, and I'm delighted to be with you. There's a huge investment in research and development. Challenging world for the enterprise. It's a challenging world for you as partners who are addressing that enterprise market, and it's challenging for us as well. We're looking to achieve quality. We are building optimized solutions. We need simplicity, we need reliability, and we need to adapt to a world out there which is changing super rapidly.
As for now, this is the end of my part, and I will see you again tomorrow morning. Okay. So, and that is tomorrow morning is today. So we're opening now day 2. So today's presentation will be around multi-gig and PoE evolution. We have our technical experts from the multiple countries ready for you in the breakout sessions. And just as a reminder, we will be sharing all the recordings with you after the event. So you will get a copy of those to watch them again and enjoy this great content. But just shortly before we move into the breakout sessions of your language choice, I would like to introduce the quiz to all of you. And you have seen the cute Ruckus dog yesterday. So I've got it over here. And actually, when you enter the quiz, which will appear now on your screen to the right, we will be giving away 5 of these little cute dogs, Ruckus dogs, which are really nice for yourself to have on your office desk, to give away to your children or grandchildren. But yeah, it's a real eye marker for Ruckus, and we would like to give away them to the top 5 participants of this quiz today. So we're just giving a little bit more time for people to join the quiz, because I think you have to enter your name, of course, because otherwise, yeah, we don't know to who to award the dogs to. So they are actually also available via the Ruckus partner portal. You can order them yourselves, but of course, you know, it's the end of the year, so it's always better to receive one as a gift. So I'm just seeing that the number is still increasing for the people to join the quiz. So we just give it a little more time before we will start with the quiz. I see there are still some more people joining, and obviously I said good morning, but to our partners in the Middle East, which are also joining today's session, it's of course already afternoon. So good afternoon for the partners in the Middle East as well. I see the number is still a bit increasing. So okay, so let's go with the quiz. So the first question, and it's based on the content of yesterday. You have 10 seconds to respond to this question. So which Ruckus ICX switches can be currently managed via the Ruckus clouds? So you can see a lot of options over here. Just giving it a little bit more time for you to answer this question. It was covered in yesterday's session, so I hope you paid attention. If you didn't attend, I hope you have the knowledge around it. So we can see a result over here. So we're having the live leaderboard over here. So the second question, when did Comscope and Ruckus join forces? So was it in 1999, 2007, 2015, or 2019? I think it's not a real difficult question to be answered. Most of you will probably know this question. So let's see the results. We're getting a leaderboard over here. So Mubin is at the top, responded quite fastly. So do respond quickly, as it will also be based on the response time. So what is the name of the Ruckus Wi-Fi product geared towards small and medium businesses? That unboxed, unleashed, unmatched, or ungeared? So there's a lot of in this question. So I hope you get this answer correctly. And do mind again, response time is key in this one. So Mubin is heading, followed by Achim, Tom, Werner, and Mike. So that's a cool thing. So over to the next question. If you need assistance with a request for your Ruckus deployment, who will you call? Is that the Ghostbusters? How do I call? Or Westcon? This is a real tricky question, I must say. So we're still, competing for the dog. So answer quickly to win this cute little dog. Mubin is still heading at the top with 3 questions answered correctly. I see some movements at the lower part. So the final question. So which are available options to onboard Ruckus ICX switch to the cloud? Is it add single switch, add stack of switches, import via CSV file, or all of the above? Just give it a little bit of time before we head towards the final winners and the leaderboard. So we can see that Mubin actually had 4 of the 5 questions answered correctly. So that's really great. So we see here the leaderboard. Thanks all for participating in this quiz. I will reach out to the top 5, or yeah, it's either 6 people at the top, so let's do six prizes this day. Yeah, so thanks all. I will reach out to you to get your prizes awarded. But yeah, thank you for participating in this quiz today. So now the time for the real content. So we're heading to the breakout of day 2 about multi-gig and PoE evolution. So you can see the different languages that we will cover today. The English session you can either join via the breakout link below this screen, or stay in this auditorium, as we will be streaming this event at the main stage as well. If you want to follow the other breakouts in the other languages, please join the breakout of your choice. So take your time, and yeah, we're moving into 2021. So here we go. Thank you for your time today.
Good morning, everyone that's joined so far. We're just going to give it a couple of minutes for the rest of the people to join. Who is our studio guest?
I've muted everyone, so they'll need to unmute.
Mike, sorry, Mike, is that you? Cool, man. Listen, will you be able to record the session? I will have to jump in and out of calls today, in and out of the session as well. Okay, no problem. Thanks. Lee, can I ask you, will you be so kind as to record the session from your end?
Yeah, I can do, yeah.
Thanks, I appreciate that, mate.
Okay.
I would do, but my option to record is grayed out. So
yeah, I know. It's because you're presenters from outside the organization, but Lee will record for us. Like I explained to you, Eddie, I have to jump in and out, and we don't want to lose the recording.
Yep.
I think if you're ready, I mean, we can start, and if there's more attendees that's going to come on, they can join as we go. Lee, if I can ask if you'll start recording now.
Yeah, start recording.
Thank you, bud. Over to you, Eddie.
right, just a quick check. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
Yeah.
This way is a good start, and you can see my presentation. So we have no early technology fails. That's all good. Well, thank you very much for joining this morning. So I'm very pleased to be presenting this session on multi-gig and PoE solutions with Ruckus Networks in conjunction with Westcon for this DISTI day that they're running. So in terms of what we're going to cover today, I'm going to give some background on Ruckus themselves. I'm going to talk about our multi-gig solutions and PoE solutions, as well as some technical background around those technologies as well, so you get a better understanding if you're not already familiar with them. And generally then we're going to continue with a demonstration at the end, which is going to be a bit of an offline demonstration. So in terms of myself, my name is Eddie Farmer, and as a bit of an introduction to me, or a little bit about me, I've been working at Ruckus for, well, coming up for 14 years now, actually in January, for quite some time. I'm a consulting pre-sales engineer, or systems engineer, sometimes as we're known, working in the UK and Ireland region. And I work in the Ruckus Venue and Campus Networks business unit. So we're specifically focused around networking within venues. So venues typically could be public type of venues, campus networks, which may be small enterprise, small business networks, going through to medium and large enterprise networks. So typically, maybe large businesses like pharmaceuticals or financial institutions, large higher education, so colleges and universities, those sort of organisations. So really from small to large. Really what I've enjoyed my time at Ruckus, so as you can see, and I'll give it a bit of background on the history of Ruckus, so where we've kind of come from and how we've ended up as part of CommScope. And what I've really enjoyed is being out and about, and obviously in these times of COVID, that's a little bit more difficult to be out and about. But I've enjoyed my role really very much, getting out and seeing different places that as generally as sort of normal people wouldn't get to see. So in the picture there on the right, so Downing Street is actually a Ruckus deployment there with one of our partners. So it's really nice to actually be able to go inside there and have a good look around everywhere, have a look around all the corners of Downing Street, which most people wouldn't get the chance or the opportunity to actually do that. And I'm by the way, you can probably see from the video, I'm the handsome fella on the left there. So that was one of my former sales colleagues on the right there, who's no longer at Ruckus. So that's just a little bit about me. So, my background predominantly has been in the wireless side, but I also, of course, get involved in the wired or the ICX switching side of the product portfolio, as well as the other products and services that Ruckus offer. In terms of the fuller agenda then, so as I said, it's going to be an introduction to Ruckus Networks. So some of you may already be familiar with Ruckus. Some of our products and technologies may already, in fact, be our partners and have sold and deployed Ruckus Networks. Some of you may be very new to it, and some of you may have sat in the session yesterday, so have already seen some of this. But hopefully there's some people out there that really don't know much about Ruckus. Who we are, what we actually do, what products we have and services. So hopefully that will give you a good introduction, all about Ruckus. Then we're going to focus a section on the multi-gig solutions, moving on to power over Ethernet technologies, and then just taking a little bit of a look at cabling considerations as well. So when we start to look at multi-gig solutions, so 2.5 gig, 5 gig, even 10 gig connectivity over copper for connecting devices and access points and cameras and so on, and IoT devices potentially as well. And also driving higher PoE budgets, so going past the sort of 30 watts, going up to perhaps 60 watts or 90 watts of power to drive things like displays, kiosks, points of terminals, all sorts of other technologies that might be connected to the network and require power over Ethernet to drive them. And of course, another one today is things like in smart buildings is LED lighting solutions and building management as well. So we'll take a look at some of the cabling considerations, and then I say normally this session will be run in a sort of a classroom environment with live labs. So what I'm just going to run through at the end is a bit of an offline demo just to show you some of the features in terms of configuration information related to the multi-gig and power over Ethernet. Right, so just as a bit of an introduction to Ruckus, all of us here at Ruckus, we love Ruckus. We think the switching and the Wi-Fi is the best out in the marketplace. So just looking at the journey, and we call this Better Together because really where we are today as part of CommScope, as a business unit of CommScope, is several companies that actually come together. So there's a lot of heritage, going right back to the mid-90s of where we are today. So if we look along the top there, so in terms of our switching, that started out as a company called Foundry Network. So unfortunately, I'm old enough to remember those days in Foundry. I was in networking in those days, so I remember those guys. So they started off with their fast iron switches for networking. They were acquired in 2009 by Brocade. And in 2004 was when Ruckus actually started, and Ruckus was really at that time, right up until 2016, a pure Wi-Fi player. So we had no sort of switching. Well, That's not entirely true. We did actually manufacture our own switches. I think maybe around 2012, somewhere around about there, maybe a bit earlier. But they weren't hugely successful, so we stopped manufacturing those ourselves. But yeah, predominantly we were a pure Wi-Fi player up until 2016. And then Aris is the other part of the puzzle that came together here. So not sort of directly related to to kind of what we do and what Brocade do, because they were really focused, or are focused, around the home networking solutions. So that's in-home Wi-Fi routers, cable modems, but they also do provide fiber and coaxial solutions for broadband infrastructure providers as well, and ISPs. So in terms of Foundry stroke Brocade and Ruckus coming together, that was in 2016 when Brocade acquired Ruckus. So that's really where we became better together in terms of being Wi-Fi and a wired solutions or networking provider. Then in 2017, Brocade was sold. Also, Broadcom acquired part of Brocade, and Ruckus was sold off. So that's both the switching and the Wi-Fi was sold off to Aris at that point in time. So it became an Aris company, or an Aris business unit. And then in 2018, which actually completed early 2019, the Ruckus and Aris company was acquired by CommScope. So that's kind of where we're sitting today, and today we're effectively a business unit within CommScope. So we are effectively still Ruckus. We are a team that focus specifically on Ruckus, whilst we do cross-sell into the CommScope infrastructure products. If we need to talk about things in detail about some of the solutions on the next slide, then typically what we'll do is actually pull in a CommScope sales team to work on that. So in terms of CommScope, very large organization. So CommScope's about 30,000 employees globally, including obviously the Ruckus Aris part that they acquired there as well. And really, they're the only vendor that really provides end-to-end connectivity. So that's really, they provide solutions, from fiber, structured cabling. They actually provide or can manufacture and sell racks, accessories and tools for terminating fiber and structured cabling as well. They have a very neat solution for powered fiber. So if you want to, for example, run a camera or an access point, outdoors, remote from buildings where there's any power or data connectivity, you can potentially run that up to 1.6 kilometers away from a building. So it's like a hybrid cable which contains DC power copper cores, and also the fiber as well, of various sorts of fiber technology there. So it's not only about connecting, making connections indoors, it's also about connecting outdoors as well. So a very broad range of products, really, right from that layer one connectivity right up through the active parts, the Wi-Fi and the switching. There's also cellular solutions as well. So CommScope manufacture things like cellular antennas as well for macro cell sites. They've also got solutions for data and cellular calls indoors as well, so LTE equipment as well that can be indoors to supplement mobile provider coverage indoors where there's poor signal, or larger enterprises actually want to have better control over the cellular coverage indoors and LTE coverage indoors. So a lot of solutions as well on top of that, distributed antenna solutions, and these play across all these different types of markets and venues as well. So whether it's a stadium, whether it's transportation, data warehousing, whether it's education, hospitality, healthcare, plays in all of those markets, both indoors and outdoors. And I think one of the neat solutions they have, whilst it's kind of more readily adapted by large enterprises, is their Systemax cabling brand, because that also has a solution for management of those structured cabling patch panels. So it's a product known as InVision, and what that actually does is give you insights into what's being patched in, what's being taken out, gives you alarms. It can actually use SNMP to monitor what devices are actually connected to the patch panels as well. So it's really a fully interactive and sort of management solution for that Systemax brand of patch panels as well. So where it's really critical to know what's actually going on, what's being patched in, what's patched out, what is actually connected, and even provide sort of security and other controls around sort of data propagating around the network as well. It's it's a really good solution there. So that's a little about CommScope, and obviously what Ruckus is providing is that Wi-Fi and switching. So if that's in building or externally, providing those sort of active network services. So Ruckus by numbers, ourselves were a pretty large organization. I think when we were acquired by Brocade, we were somewhere certainly in excess of 1,000 employees. I think it was about 1,500 employees at that time. So already a pretty large organization by ourselves. We've got more than 100,000 end user customers, and this slide is actually probably about a year old, so it's probably quite a bit more than that. We're obviously a global organization across about 150 countries with many partners, and I'll talk a little bit about how we operate in the market. We've also got a service provider sort of business unit or division, if you want to call it, of Ruckus as well. So they're the ones that actually focus into service providers. So it's typically sort of like hotspot operators. So someone like Sky, for example, that acquired the cloud as hotspots. So that's one of our customers. So they actually sit under the service provider arm and have their own sort of sales and technical team that look after those. So we've got the two parts of the business. We've got the enterprise side, which is absolutely 100% channel focused, and then we've got the service provider business, which tends to be sometimes a little bit more end user customer focused, working with those large service providers. Obviously, from perspective of research and development, large team of engineers which are globally distributed across predominantly three sort of physical or geographic locations. So that's the US, India, and China. So we've got research and development centers in other locations as well, like in Singapore, for example. So a very, very large global organization. As I mentioned, in the part that we sit looking after campus and venue enterprise networks, we are very channel focused. So whilst we do have some direct end user interactions, generally that's always in conjunction with a partner. So we sell through the value added distributors. So like Westcon, for example. So we use those value added distributors to provide not only the logistics of stocking and pricing, but also to provide supports to the resellers as well that they look after. And those resellers, they may be sort of typical solutions providers, they may be small resellers, or much larger systems integrators as well. And another arm of what we provide is managed service as well. So we enable managed services through our Smart Zone platform and also from our cloud hosted platform to allow our partners to actually be able to host our solutions and manage the Wi-Fi and wired networks, and sell that as a service to their end user customers. So they actually, they're a lot more sticky with for end user customers. And in terms of, we have different levels of partners. So our partners are known as solution providers. So depending on the revenue commits, on how many people are trained from a sales and a technical perspective, what we'll actually have is a solution provider, and then the larger partners are actually known as elite solution providers. And then sitting underneath that, we have various specializations. So it may be that we have a partner that is an MSP, so they take on the service specialization for MSP, or it might be an organization that is predominantly focused on selling cloud-based solutions and software as a service, so they may want to take on the specialization as for cloud there. So sort of different levels of specialization within our partner program as well, but open up benefits to those partners. So rather than just being a sort of a flat solution provider, if you are specializing as an MSP, for example, then that will kind of open more doors in terms of MDF and sales and technical support and so on as well by signing up to those programs. So what is Ruckus about? What's kind of our mantra from where we started? I mean, ultimately, in terms of Wi-Fi, the key thing here, you can put as much on this sort of slide as you want to, but the key thing is really about the user experience. Especially from Wi-Fi, it's got to be a great user experience. Wi-Fi over the years has kind of suffered from a bad reputation. Whilst that's a lot better today, as capacities have improved and generally, as Wi-Fi has evolved and the technologies, it has got a lot better. But nonetheless, sometimes it doesn't always work quite as people expect. And the Wi-Fi network there. So whether it's a corporate Wi-Fi network that you're providing, or whether it's a guest network that you're providing, the users all expect a great experience, and they expect their applications to work. They expect to get their data very quickly over that Wi-Fi network. They don't really care about what's at the back of it. They just expect a great experience. And for business users, of course, that's very critical, because they're not going to be just browsing web pages or looking at YouTube. They're actually going to be using business applications, and those business applications need to actually work across the Wi-Fi network. And of course, today as well, a lot of collaboration tools. So, like Teams, whether it's Skype or some other form of communication, that all has to work today as well, because a lot of people are working remotely from the offices. So ultimately, everything is about having a great user experience, and it doesn't matter how simple or complex that the underlying infrastructure is. The user doesn't care about that. They don't really care how much it costs the company or the organization running it to put it in. All they care about is having that great experience. But of course, what Ruckus is about is trying to make the networking simpler as well. So, integration of management of the Wi-Fi and the wired networking into a single pane of glass management platform, whether that's cloud-based or locally based as an on-premise controller. That's all very important. Try and keep things very, very simple for the lean IT teams, and also to offer a very cost-effective package or solution. So trying to make sure that whether it's a wired network, that the per port cost is as low as possible, or whether it's a wireless network, that every connection to that wireless network is as cost effective as possible. So, for example, being able to support a high number of users per AP obviously gives a much better return on investment compared to some of our competitors. And continuing what we're about, it's really about connecting the users and their devices to those apps and services. So the apps and services may be in the cloud, they may be somewhere on the internet, they may be cloud hosted software as a service, or they may be internal applications within the data center. But ultimately, it's about connecting those devices, the Wi-Fi devices and the wired devices at the network edge through an access layer wired network, maybe to an aggregation layer, and then onto the core of that network, out to the internet or onto the local services. So really that's what we're about. We're about that connectivity piece there. It's the network edge, the aggregation, and the core is what we're doing. In terms of the portfolio, I'm just going to get my little pointy laser up here just as we go along. So in terms of portfolio, we just go along the top here. So I'm not going to go into too much detail about these, but just enough at a high level that may get some interest in terms that you may have applications for these different types of services and products that we actually have. So in terms of software and software as a service, we've got a product called CloudPath, and CloudPath is about network edge or network access security. So whether it's a wired or whether it's a wireless network, it's about making sure that the network knows what device, what user is connecting to the network, and that the user connecting to the network is connecting to the network they're meant to be connecting to. Obviously from a wired perspective, it's not quite so easy to kind of spoof wired connections, but from a Wi-Fi perspective, that's not too difficult to do. So what you want to do is to make sure that when your users are connecting to your corporate network, that's actually what they're connecting to, not to a sort of a honey trap or a honeypot that's being run on an access point by some sort of hacker, sort of inside or outside of your actual premises. So CloudPath is all about mutual authentication, and typically, what we're using there is using 802.1x EAP TLS with certificates. So we're pushing down client certificates through an onboarding portal, so making it as easy as possible for those devices, especially if they're BYOD devices, to get onboarded to that secure network. Outside of that, it's also got some other really nice features as well in terms of things like guest access as well. So lots of features. It can be traditional voucher based. It can be social media based guest access. It can be sponsored access. So if I'm actually coming to a meeting in an organization, then the meeting organizer will actually get an email and they'll approve or reject my guest access. So lots of different ways that you can actually do guest access. And then finally, the other piece, which is really getting a lot of traction in an area or a marketplace that we're currently looking at, is multi-tenanted buildings, so MDUs, multi-dwelling units, and that may be apartment blocks, it may be comprising of student accommodation, it may be hotel rooms, for example. But what it's about providing each of those residents in those different types of multi-tenanted dwellings. It's about providing them a unique key for onboarding devices to the Wi-Fi network, providing security and policies around that as well, even down to automatically assigning a VLAN to them. So what they can have is effectively have a follow me private network. So if you take, for example, the apartment block may have some retail units, it may have a gym, cafe, and so on. So whilst the resident is within their apartment, they're using effectively their own private network in a private VLAN, that can actually follow them down to other parts of the actual estate as well. So if they go down to the gym, for example, they can still have access to their private network using this type of sort of follow me networking technology. So CloudPath has got a lot of different facets in terms of the sort of services that it actually provides. The second one is something that we recently introduced known as Cloud Analytics. So this is all about reporting and analytics. And when we talk about analytics, we talk about network analytics. So it's not application analytics as such. It's all about getting visibility and insights of what's going on in your network and what issues there may be. So without you having someone on, or I should say on your end user customers, help desk or IT support team having to look at the wireless network, monitor it, see what's going on, see if there's changes in the network, see if there's changes in behavior. It can tell you, for example, and give you insights if, for example, there are issues with Radius servers or DHCP servers. So it's not just about the Ruckus infrastructure, it's anything that's kind of related to that as well. So what it does is to automatically, kind of baselines the network behavior over a period of time, and it automatically creates, using machine learning and AI, it creates incidents which are prioritized between P1 and P4 for, it may be to do with performance, it may to do with the infrastructure itself, or to do with services. It creates these these incidents, and it gives you insights into them as to what the root cause may be and how they may be solved. It gives you a nice health dashboard that's easy to understand. It gives you client troubleshooting tools as well. So it's something that we're seeing a lot of traction in the marketplace in terms of actually helping customers to have effectively an extra body that's there 24/7 on their support desk, monitoring the network and actually making sure that everything is running smoothly. On the right-hand side here, we've got a Wi-Fi location service known as SPOT, Smart Positioning Technology. So this is anywhere you may want to do, for example, have wayfinding applications using Wi-Fi. Another one may be, for example, personal safety or asset tracking as well using Wi-Fi. So any devices that are connected to a Wi-Fi network, if you actually want to track their location or where they've actually been, for example, in the last few days, then you can track that. So various different applications for that. And we have a nice little dashboard built into the location engine itself. So that gives you footfall statistics and heat map and some of this basic location services. And we have a number of ecosystem parties that we actually work with as well, that can kind of take the analytics of location to the next level. In terms of control and management, today our main sort of focus today in terms of mid to larger enterprises is the Smart Zone controller, and we call it the Smart Zone network controller because it can manage both the wired and the Wi-Fi network. And there are two versions. You can have an appliance version, so a physical box, or you can have a virtual appliance. And the virtual appliance can be run on premise, so locally within your data center or your computer room. It can run on Hyper-V, for example, or it can run on KVM for Linux, or it can run on VMware. Alternatively, you may actually want to private host that up in cloud as well. So it can run on AWS, it can run on Google Compute as well. So it doesn't have to be sort of on-prem as such. You can actually privately host it in cloud as well if you want to. Also got our own cloud managed, so this is a public cloud solution, and this is actually built on our Smart Zone technology, but we've made the interface kind of simpler for more lean IT teams. So it is very feature rich, it is very functional, but the UI is kind of a bit simpler than what it is actually on the Smart Zone. For those sort of organizations that don't, they're typically going to be the small to mid-sized large organizations and typically multi-site organizations that don't have a dedicated IT team, looking after just the network alone and the components of the network alone. They'll have generalist IT people that are looking after everything, the phone systems, the applications, the servers, the printers and everything else. So our cloud managed can be an ideal solution for those types of organizations that want the power of Ruckus. It's the same access points, they've got underneath the same engine that is our virtual Smart Zone or our physical Smart Zone, but they want something that's a little bit simpler to manage on a day-to-day basis. Then we've got a controllerless solution known as Unleash. So this is where there is no external controller. So it's not a controller up in cloud, and it's not a virtual or a physical controller. The controller actually runs on one of the access points, and the second one can be designated as a backup controller as well, so that you get resilience. And this is really ideal for those smaller types of sites. So anything from a handful of APs up to it does go up to 128 APs, but typically it may be between a handful of APs and between 50 to 70 APs, that sort of size organization may be deploying Unleashed. So very, very simple solution to deploy and to manage. Then we have an IoT solution known as the IoT Suite. So this is all about consolidating and collapsing the IoT infrastructure to make it more efficient and also to make it more secure and easier to onboard devices. So from an access point perspective, our access points have a USB port, and you can put a dongle into that to run radio technologies such as Zigbee or BLE if you want to, depending on what use case you've got for your IoT. The newer APs, the Wi-Fi 6 APs, actually have Zigbee and BLE radios built into them, as well as having the USB port. So on one side, you're consolidating the radio infrastructure rather than having to run overlay, radio networks for Zigbee, if that's what you happen to be using, and or BLE. It's actually integrated into the AP, so you don't have additional cable runs that you need to run in. There's no additional sort of power that you have to consider for that either. So it helps consolidate the physical radio side. And then the IoT controller, which is a VM, effectively allows you to consolidate the gateways that you have with your IoT solutions. So every IoT solution from different vendors has its own gateway. Now that might be a cloud-based gateway, it might be sort of an on-prem gateway of some sort, it may be a physical box. And what we allow it to do via an SDK is to actually integrate that functionality into our IoT controller, so that you don't have lots of different gateways to manage across different platforms. So it makes it a lot easier to actually manage and onboard devices and manage those devices as well, and make things a lot more secure in your IoT infrastructure. In terms of switches, we have a very wide range of switches. I've only kind of picked out the ones here which are the newer switch families, which have been since the sort of a merger, or the acquisition by Brocade, the acquisition by Brocade of Ruckus. So this is really where the sort of newer switch family. So we have some others like the 7750 and 7450 and the 7250, which are the original Brocade ones, but they are still actively sold and supported. But these are really the main sort of ones that we're kind of selling today. So we've got at an access level, entry level access, we've got 7150. Different formats. We'll look at these in a lot more detail anyway, but it's 24, 48 ports, PoE, non-PoE, multi-gig versions, and we've also got small desktop type of versions as well, which can be rack mounted. But if you only require a few ports of multi-gig, for example, or high PoE to drive some displays or some cameras, rather than putting in a 24-port switch, you can just put in a small 10-port switch to actually provide that multi-gig or high PoE connectivity for them. So it's a lot more cost efficient. And then when we start to look at premium access or at aggregation, we've got the 7550 family, and then we've got 7650 family, which is typically more aggregation than access, and starting to encroach into core space. And then at the high end core, we've got the 7850 product family there with very high port densities. So being able to run like 128 ports at 25 gig and things like that, for example. So very, very high port densities right up to that high sort of core edge there. In terms of access points, we'll look at more detail of these as well. So we've got a range of outdoor access points, obviously IP67 certified in terms of their sort of robustness to water ingress. We've got a range of indoor access points as well, and then a range of specialty access points, which I'll also cover for different types of market verticals. So some of them may be focused around things like, for example, hospitality. Other ones may be focused around transportation. I've really kind of talked about the management options in the previous slide, but this really just summarizes what the options are. So we've got on the left-hand side there for just very simple, very small to medium-sized businesses up to 128 access points. Unleashed is an ideal solution, and especially for single-site type of deployments. It is really just very simple plug and play, no controller required. It actually runs on one of the access points. It's got a really good level of functionality, got good levels of guest access and controls as well in there. So a really, really good solution for those small to medium types of deployments. Where you might start to look at cloud is firstly when you as partners, when you're competing against other cloud providers, so the likes of Meraki, and they are pure play cloud. They have no option to have access points like a controller solution, or to have an on-premise controller for scalability and more granularity of control, and actually owning the kit yourself. So so we have all these options. We are very flexible. It's the same access points with the core, same core Ruckus technologies in the access points. And if you are competing against, the customer really wants to have their Wi-Fi and a wired network managed in cloud as a software, as a subscription service, then we can offer that as well. And where cloud is much better than Unleashed is for multi-site deployments, because then if you have multi-site deployments, so maybe for example, a school sort of education trust that's being looked after by one IT team, one central IT team, and they're rolling out Wi-Fi or have Wi-Fi across multiple sites. It gives them a single pane of glass across all those different sites, so it really helps them to manage all those different sites from one single place, and actually see what's going on as well, with a good deal of functionality in there as well. Then on the right hand side, some customers still prefer to have on-premise physical appliance controllers, so you have that option with a smart zone, or it can be a virtual controller, as I mentioned before. And the key thing about smart zone is it is really a very very scalable and flexible platform in terms of not only where you deploy it, but it works in a fully active cluster. So you have N+1 resilience. So if you put 2 nodes into a cluster, both of those will be active and actually servicing, the APs themselves and other services that are running on the Wi-Fi over wired network. You get single pane of glass visibility. You can easily do multi-site deployments with it as well, and they may be within the same country for the same organization. They may be geographically dispersed organizations or business units of a big corporate as well. And it's also a base for our partners that want to become MSP or provide an MSP offering as well, in that they can set this up and they can actually provide separated views and control and configuration for all of their hosted customers. So for the MSP, it really gives them a good return on investment that they've got a single cluster of controllers that they can actually host multiple customers on. So effectively, it is a private cloud solution for the MSP partners out there. So looking at the access points, I've got some slides with more detail, which I'm not going to go through all the detail on them, but this is how they kind of fit out in terms of outdoor, indoor, and specialty APs. And I'm just going to make a note. I'm kind of, well, I should never assume that everyone is familiar with, the Wi-Fi. Fairly new. Most people up until 802.11ax in the Wi-Fi world were familiar with just using the standards term for what Wi-Fi was known as, based on its kind of current iteration. So 802.11ac, is kind of like the previous generation, because it's now 802.11ax. But the Wi-Fi Alliance, who actually take the standards and then do all the certification testing plans for them and for other features and functions, the Wi-Fi Alliance decided that with 802.11ax, which is the current newest standard, that they were actually going to give them numbers just to make the each generation of Wi-Fi easier to identify. So Wi-Fi 6 is 802.11ax, which is the current current standard. Wi-Fi 5 is, whilst you could say it's the previous generation, it's still very much applicable to a lot of customers. So there may be some benefits in terms of slightly lower cost on things like the access points, but it's still a very good high performing technology. There are lots of new additions to Wi-Fi 5 or 11ac, but actually improve capacity and performance. So whilst we still have a large number of APs for the Wi-Fi 5, and most of those are getting refreshed with Wi-Fi 6 models, Wi-Fi 5 is still very much a valid technology for a lot of our customers. So as we look across the outdoor APs, we've got sort of an entry or mid-range access point with T310. This is really the mainstay. It's a really nice small form factor access point. It's really the mainstay of outdoor deployments. Slightly more powerful T610, and then the recently introduced T750, which is Wi-Fi 6 enabled there. And this is really quite a beastie. It's quite a large enclosure, but it's really packed with a lot of features and functionality. So you get in there, for example, not only do you get copper connection, you also get SFP or SFP plus connection in there. You get data and PoE out for it as well. So if you want to connect a camera, so you have data and PoE going into it, and you may want to connect a camera or digital display, you can actually have a single source of power and data to the AP, and then actually also take a power and data feed out of it. It's got a GPS chip embedded into it, so that it can actually self-locate it onto the maps in the controller. It's also got things like radar pre-detection as well for DFS, so it can actually see any channels and blacklist them without having to be disruptive to the Wi-Fi network. So it's really feature packed, but it comes in a pretty large and expensive package. In terms of indoors, the entry level is the R320. Then typically, for most organizations, it's either the mid-range Wi-Fi 5 or now the mid-range Wi-Fi 6 APs. So you have in both of these, you have the mid-range and premium mid-range, which is just a bit of a higher spec in terms of the number of radio streams and processors. So for example, in Wi-Fi 6, you've got the R550 and you've got the R650, which is a slightly uprated version. And then you've got the premium APs, which are typically going to be deployed into much higher density areas. So this may be where you've got large conferencing centers, they may be deployed into stadiums, just anywhere, very, very kind of large restaurants, high density restaurants, or cafeterias or cafes. Anywhere where you've got really high density of users is typically where you're going to go for these more premium APs that support higher densities of users on them. But in terms of speciality, all of these three here on the left can be sort of bundled into the same one as a hospitality AP. So what these are known as a wall plate APs. So they're basically designed to go over or fit on top of the existing RJ45 outlet. So they get their data and the PoE from the existing RJ45 outlet. And what they then provide is really good in-room Wi-Fi. And also they provide Ethernet ports on them as well. So you can physically plug devices into them. So these are ideal for things like, having one in each hotel room where you may want to connect a set-top box to it via the Ethernet connection. You may have a VoIP phone in the room as well connected, and it can also provide power out on the H510 for that. You may have like an electronic minibar that's wired as well, connecting, as well as having really good in-room Wi-Fi. So student accommodation, hospitality is typically where these products are deployed. So the H320 is like the entry-level version. The H510 is the largest sort of full on with 4 ports and a PoE out on it. And we've also got a cable modems. Quite often in hotels, they still, some hotels don't have structured cabling. It's still cable systems using DOCSIS, so it has DOCSIS modem built into it and can actually be used on that cable infrastructure. A couple more specialist APs here. So we've got the M510, which has got 2 SIM slots in it. So you can put a data SIM in it from Vodafone or whoever it happens to be, and actually backhaul your data over the cellular data network. So that can be used as a backup. So if, for example, the Ethernet connection fails, then it will automatically switch to the cellular data network, or it can be used for pop-up Wi-Fi situations. So that might be building sites, it might be outdoor events where you want to provide Wi-Fi. So you can use that for various means, or just as a backup for your broadband, for example. And then we've got the E510, which is typically going to be used in something like transportation. This is where you have a separate radio module to the antenna module. And one of the things I'm not really talking about in this presentation, but I should just mention it, is something known as Beamflex, which is really the Ruckus unique kind of smart from an RF perspective. It's really where Ruckus started to make standards-based Wi-Fi more reliable and to perform better. And what it is, it's rather than using omnidirectional antennas like our competitors, it's using like an antenna array, which is digitally switched to actually deliver the strongest signal towards the client, and also to be able to hear the client better as well. So it's all about improving the RF environment. So all of our APs here that we're seeing here include this Beamflex antenna, which is one of our key USPs compared to our competitors. In terms of the switching, this is just a bit more detail on the switches and where they sit in terms of the product family. So a little bit expanded on that earlier slide. So again, I'm not going to go through all of them, but basically as you go from left to right, obviously these will sit deeper into your network. So on the left-hand side here, typically these are the access switches, so entry-level and premium access switches. And then you start to look at aggregation or maybe small core, and then you look at aggregation stroke or large aggregation and actual core switching, or top of rack switching as well. So the high port densities on the 7850, you may be using that for top of rack applications as well within a data center. So an enterprise data center, for example, where you've got lots of servers wanting to connect over 10 gig or potentially over 25 gig as well. I mentioned already the small form factor options that we have in the 7150 family. The other thing that we actually have is the multi-gig options as well in these. So we've got in the 7150, we've got the Z series here, which provides multi-gig. So that provides 1 2.5 gig multi-gig ports on there. The 7550, that also provides multi-gig ports, as does the 7650 as well. So all these switches here, these switch families, 7150, 7550, and 7650, all provide multi-gig capability as well as very high PoE budgets. And so you can buy the models depending on the model. For example, in the 7150 as access or 7550, you can purchase them as non-PoE, you can purchase them as classic PoE, or multi-gig versions with higher PoE budgets as well. And some of the options, like the little desktop ones, they're fanless, so they're very quiet. There's no noise really from them at all. And some of the other models as well, you can actually turn off the fan. So if they happen to be kind of sitting in a closet that's in a room that's occupied and they're a bit noisy, quite often the fans in switches are quite noisy because there's at least 3 fans typically in a switch, sort of full size switch. So you can actually run a reduced PoE budget. You can actually run them in fanless mode as well. On top of that, we have a range of optics as well. So that's optics to go into the SFP and SFP plus ports, and also a range of direct attached cables as well. So we don't lock our optics to to be Ruckus optics. You can use third-party optics, but just as a word of warning, but if you do use third-party optics and you have any support cases related to stacking, for example, so you can stack any of these switches within a family up to 12 switches, and you can do long-range stacking because we're just using standard optics. So you could do stacking, for example, between buildings over a 10 gig fiber link. But if you do use third-party optics for that, or uplinks to other core switches or to routers, for example, and there are issues on those links, then you won't get support on them. So if you do happen to use third-party optics because of price or because you've got them from your old switches that you threw away, then just make sure that you do have some Ruckus optics just to prove to support that it's not an optics issue. Right, so I'm just going to take a quick pause there, as I don't think I've actually stopped for a breath so far. But just going to take a quick pause there and just ask Daryl. Sorry, I should have introduced Daryl actually on the call. So Daryl, my colleague, is actually sitting in as my wingman today. So he's one of the BSCs in the team. And Daryl is just sitting on the side wings there. And if you've got any questions that you want to post, I should have said at the start, if you've got any questions you want to post in the chat, then feel free to do that. We will have time for some Q&A at the end as well. I'm just going to see if there are any questions that have come up, Daryl. I don't know if you've had any to answer or any that you do want answering.
No, you must have been too good, Eddie, because there's not a murmur in the chat window. But now, hopefully, everyone knows that I'm here. They can put some challenging questions in the chat for me, and I can hopefully answer those whilst you're doing a sterling job on the main presentation.
Yeah, thank you for that, Daryl. Yeah, I should have mentioned that to start with. Sorry about that. It's my bad not doing the housekeeping part to start with.
No problem.
Okay, so looking at multi-gig solutions. So, you know, we're seeing that there is a drive, and this is for the Loro Group back in 2019. You know, we are seeing this ourselves, that, you know, more customers are asking for multi-gig solutions. You know, they are seeing devices that need to connect with higher than 1 gig throughput, you know, specifically at the edge or the access network. So, you know, we are seeing this growth in both 2.5 and 5 gig. You know, from what we see here as well is kind of what we're seeing represents it as well, is that, you know, the growth in 2 gig is going to be the larger one of those, although, you know, 5 gig is growing as well. And that's going to cut into, you know, some of that 1 gig business. You know, there are going to be people or customers deploying, you know, increasingly as the technology becomes, more pervasive and becomes cheaper as well. More people will be, you know, by de facto putting in 2.5 gig switching rather than 1 gig switching into their networks at the edge as well. So, you know, this is what we're seeing. It's definitely a market trend we're seeing, increasing multi-gig connectivity. And of course, there are things driving this. It's not just, you know, Wi-Fi and access points that's driving it, but, you know, in the old days, the bottleneck used to be, kind of between the AP and the client. So, you know, when you go back to the days of 802.11n or Wi-Fi 4 as it was, and to some degree as well, unless you had premium APs that were Wi-Fi capable, the bottleneck was still typically on the Wi-Fi network across the radios or across the air. It was pretty unlikely that you're actually going to break a gigabit of throughput across, the Wi-Fi network. So really, you know, having your APs connected to your access network via 1 gig was absolutely fine, because you're never going to actually push per AP, more than a gig of data. However, you know, that's really changing now, and especially with Wi-Fi 6. So anything, you know, above the R550, so the R650 upwards, you know, potentially with the throughput capabilities of the APs, and if you have Wi-Fi 6 enabled clients and, you know, they're streaming data or something else, they may be really pushing the bandwidth of the AP there. So, you know, that could be well over a gig now, but you're actually pushing in actual throughput across both radios of the AP. So, you know, having a 1 gig connection to your access switch is no longer going to be good enough, especially if you're moving to Wi-Fi 6. So, you know, that can become the new bottleneck. So when your customers are looking to, you know, to upgrade their networks, to put in, you know, higher capacity Wi-Fi 6 APs, they need to also look at their switch network and whether that's actually going to cause a bottleneck. And of course, here I'm just looking specifically at the connection between the AP and the access switch or the edge switch. It may actually be deeper in the network. So we'll kind of look at that on the next slide as well. But specifically looking here at the access connection, you know, 1 gig is probably not good enough now. You need to look at start putting in 2.5 gig or 5 gig connections between the AP new Wi-Fi 6 access points at the edge here, get great performance at the edge, and then actually find bottlenecks somewhere deeper in your network. You need to look at your whole network and refresh that as well. So in terms of our solutions at a high level, starting down at the access points, we've already seen there, but we've got a number of Wi-Fi 6 APs that can certainly push the boundaries of a 1 gig connection. So these ones that we've listed here, you've got the R650 has got a 2.5 gig connection on it. The 720, which is actually Wi-Fi 5 AP, but it's a premium Wi-Fi 5 AP, has also got a 2.5 gig Ethernet port on it. The R750, and then the R850, which is our highest performing access point with 12 radio streams in total, it actually requires a 5 gig connection on it. So if you're actually driving both radios as hard as possible, you can certainly push potentially 2.5, 3 gig of actual throughput through that. So you'd exceed the 2.5 gig performance on there as well. So at that bottom end where the users are connecting to, you can certainly drive that high level of performance, and the APs are already enabled for multi-gig. The access layer, we've got these switches. We've got a 7150 product family, we've got the 7550 product family, we've got the 7650 product family. So the aggregation layer there, providing multi-gig connectivity. And then as you start to go up to the access layers and the core layers or backbone layers there, you may be utilizing, depending on budget, some of the other switches that we've seen, like the 7550s and the 7650s, or you may be looking at some of the other products like the 7750s or the 7850s as well, sitting up at this this aggregation and sort of core or backbone layer as well. So across most of those we have solutions for multi-gig, but specifically the ones that we're looking at in terms of aggregation and access will be the 7150, the 7550, and the 7650. A busy slide here, so I've kind of highlighted the bit that's of most interest and sort of relevance to this discussion here. So the 550 we can discount because the 550, whilst it can run a combined maximum PHY rate, so maximum physical data rate of 1.7 gigabits per second, in reality it's unlikely that even if you're running both radios at full speed with clients connecting and doing things, it's pretty unlikely because the overheads in the 802.11 protocol, it's quite unlikely that you'd get anywhere close to that, in terms that you'd probably be looking at 60% best case, best case environments, really pushing the radios hard. You'd probably get about 60% of these PHY rate performance. So this is the actual figures that the physical data rate is negotiated at, but it doesn't mean that's what you're actually going to get through from the AP, depending on the conditions and the clients that are connected. So on the R550, that just has 1 gig ports because it's unlikely in terms of actual data throughput you're going to exceed a gig on it. But once you go to the 650, then these are the ones that have got the multi-gig ports that we saw on the previous slide, for example. And these are the ones that also start to require, for the next section, higher PoE budgets as well. So when you start to look at the sort of ultra high density APs, for those conference centers, those public exhibition halls, the stadiums, and so on, then this is where you start to look at requiring higher PoE budgets to actually drive those APs, because they have more functionality. Not only do they have now the newer ones got the the IoT radios built into them, they have more radio streams in them, and with more performance they also require more power. So if you're running, for example, the minimum amount of power up to some of these larger APs, then you will potentially lose functionality, and that's all detailed as per this note on the data sheets for each product. So it will tell you, based on the amount of power that's been provided to the AP, what features will be disabled. So it may be, for example, the second Ethernet port, or it may be the IoT radios, or both of them, depending on the power that's actually going into the AP. So two kind of as part of this whole story of multi-gig and PoE, the two stories there, they go hand in hand in terms of as you go kind of up, you've got higher performing Wi-Fi networks. You need to have switches that can provide higher power and that multi-gig capability. So these really, I did debate on taking these slides out. I didn't actually create the original slide deck, so these are just giving you a bit more information on each of the APs, and you can see a bit of a prettier picture as to what they actually look like and kind of where they're where they're positioned. So the R550 is our kind of go-to entry point for normal enterprise deployments. If you take education, for example, if you're deploying into a secondary school, the R550 is typically the AP of choice that you'd be deploying in there in most locations. And you may want to upscale to an R650 R650 or an R750 for more dense areas like the assembly hall, where you may have more concurrent clients, or in a college you may have larger lecture rooms or auditoriums where you may want to go to larger APs. But in general, this is our kind of go-to AP for most enterprise deployments. So I'm not going to go through all the features and specs here, but I've left the slides in, so when you get a copy of them, you can just see some more specs, and obviously you can go to our website and download the data sheets for all of these. So I'll just flip through those, which will save us all a bit of time, and it will mean you get to have your lunch a bit sooner as well. So just very quickly touching on the switches in a little bit more detail. So this is one of the desktop switches, small form factor desktop switches. So it's got integrated power supply. You can't change the power supply on it. It's just meant as like a little desktop switch. Doesn't have a fan in it, so it's very quiet. But that said, it's a really powerful little box. So you've got here 6 ports, which provides 1 and 2.5 gig. So it's got multi-gig capabilities on these ports, and it provides PoE plus, which is 802.3 AT power, and it's also got this special feature called Ruckus Overdrive. So it's a proprietary feature to Ruckus, or Ruckus PoE Overdrive, I should have called that. And this actually allows the ports to provide more power than the AT or the PoE specification. So when it's used in conjunction with Ruckus APs that require more power, as you'll see in the labs, it can actually provide, depending on the switch port or the switch that it's actually on, it can provide up to 40 watts of power compared to the normal 30 watts of power that the AT standard is. So that's really useful in terms that if you want to drive a number of higher powered devices like our APs, that you can actually provide that extra power using that PoE overdrive feature. Then we've got 2 ports which do 1 and 2.5 gigabits per second, and they support POH or BT. And then we've got 2 ports that also do 2.5, 5 gig and 10 gig as well on copper there, providing those higher powers. So BT is the highest higher power specification for PoE, as you'll see. So depending on whether it's POH or UPOH, it's UPoE, sorry, I should say, that can be driving 60 or 90 watts of power. So you may be required 60 watts of power potentially for some of our higher end APs, but if you're running other devices like potentially some sort of motorized cameras, or you're running some large displays or LED lighting, you may require those higher power standards to drive those. And then in terms of uplink and stacking, you've also got two SFP plus ports there. So it really is a powerful little switch there. Then outside of that, we've got the 7150 ZP, which is the multi-gig entry-level access solution there. So you can see on that, it's got 16 1/2.5 gig ports that provide high power on there as well. And that is also a little bit more sort of mid-enterprise grade in terms that you've got dual fans, and you've got dual power supplies in that as well. So you can increase the PoE budget. You've got the 7550, which can be premium access or aggregation. So here, what we've actually got, for example, on this ZP model, we've got 12 ports which are multi-gig, which actually provide 1, 2.5, 5, and 10 gig connectivity on those copper ports. So definitely a lot more flexible there in terms of number of ports. And you also get faster uplinks, stacking ports on here as well. So you can see potentially you could be doing 100 gig uplinks to your core network if you needed to be there, as well as having the redundant and modular power supplies and fans in there as well. The 7650, on here you actually get 24 multi-gig ports on there with higher power budgets as well, and again you get resilient fans and power supplies. So whether depending on your customer's budget, we have multi-gig and high power solutions really to fit every budget and every use case. This little flow chart here might just kind of help you to make decisions. We've also got a nice little tool on the website which allows you to put in the ports, the speed of the ports you're looking at, what sort of power budgets you need, and that will actually give you a switch selection based on what you've actually inputted. So it's kind of like a bit of a switch chooser, so you can actually see that under the switch section on our website there. But this is also just a handy little reference. So do you need 5/10 gig ports, or do you want to future-proof? If you don't, so 2.5 gig is sufficient. Is it for a large number of access points, or is it just for a small handful of access points? If it's just for a small handful of access points, you can just go for the little desktop form factor. So going back to that example in the school, the only place you may need to put higher performing APs is in the school hall, for example, and maybe into refectory as well, where you have a high density of clients, maybe into the sixth form room. So what you can actually do is to use a small desktop form factor switch there, which is a lot more cost efficient, and obviously it's not noisy either. If it's a larger number, then you may want to look at the access level, the entry level there, sorry, for access, the 7150 48 port ZP there. If you do want the higher 5 and 10 gig performing ports there, again, if it's just a few access points or devices connecting to it, then it could be the 7150 C10 ZP. If you want a larger number of ports, then you'd look for something like potentially the 7550 or the 7650, whichever kind of the more mid and high end switches there compared to the 7150. Okay, so before I go on to PoE, any questions, Daryl?
No, all quiet, Eddie. You're doing a sterling job.
Good. I'll plow on then. Okay, it's a bit similar, like in a similar section, just a bit of market sort of analysis and research in terms of PoE usage and how it's changing over time. So going back a few years, predominantly PoE was put into enterprise networks really to drive IP-based desk phones. As voice over IP became sort of more popular, and then obviously as we started to see the boom in enterprise for wireless networks, more and more started to get utilized for powering access points, and then over time other use cases have come up, and that's really the area that's significantly increasing now in terms of PoE. Of course, yes, you still need them for the other devices like your access points and your desk phones potentially, but there's all sorts of different things there now. So as I mentioned, you may have information displays that are powered over Ethernet and get their data. You may have thin computing terminals as well, instead of having full blown sort of computers on the desktops. In smart buildings, you may have LED lighting that's powered by PoE. Other types of displays like kiosks as well, which may not just be displays, they may be sort of more interactive information systems. IoT devices as well, your cameras, things like badge readers, physical door security as well can be connected and using PoE. Point of sales terminals. So there are a huge number of other applications as well for delivering power over data cables out there. But that market is really kind of growing, and I think will continue to grow as well. And the other thing about these are these devices, they are driving up the need for high power as well. So in the days of when we had sort of 11A AN going back several years, but the power burden of the AP was relatively low, between 15 to 30 watts, and quite often the actual operating power requirement was far lower than that. When we started to see Wi-Fi 5 and 11AC, the APs got a bit more powerful. So in some cases with premium APs with multiple sort of radio streams, maybe 4 radio streams on both bands, potentially requiring more than 30 watts of power there. And as we move into Wi-Fi 6, even more powerful APs with, currently we have our premium AP, the R850 with 12 radio streams. So that's a lot of radio streams to drive. It's also, the integral IoT radios as well to drive the additional USB port and so on. So potentially, could even go past at some point that 60 watt requirement. Outside of that, all those other sort of devices that I mentioned on the previous slide, but have high power draws as well, relatively high power draws as well, that could be connected to the network and drawing power from your PoE switches. Again, a busy table here, so it gives a bit more detail on all the different standards. So the IEEE standards for PoE, the original one was 802.3 AF, and sometimes you have to be a little bit careful. It's not so common nowadays, but some vendors, especially more in the prosumer market, kind of invented their own PoE standards, or sort of proprietary standards that weren't interoperable with standard devices. So you could get a PoE switch from a particular vendor, and you plug a standards-based access point into it, and it wouldn't power up because they're using proprietary signaling. Doesn't really happen so much now. Most people, most vendors in the networking space adhere to the standards. The original one was .3 AF there. So right back in 2005, then we had AF, which provided more power. The latest ratification standard is, which I think was 2016 or 2018. Sorry, it says there. I was thinking of something else. I was thinking the cabling standard for 2016, which we'll talk about. So 2018 was BT. So that was really an amalgamation of two other high power standards from particular vendors, which weren't interoperable, and they've kind of been taken on board by the IEEE and standardized as 802.3 BT. So that today is really about the highest power standard that we have in networking, and can provide up to 90 watts of power at what we call the PSE, so the power source and equipment. So your switch or your mid-span power injector or your PoE injector. That's known as the PSE. So that's the thing that actually provides the power. And then the device that actually is receiving the power is known as the PD, or the powered device. And the reason, if you're not familiar with PoE, why there's a difference between those is the length of the cable run. So obviously power is lost over the cable. So these are all based on a total cable run with a number of insertion points. I think it's 4 insertion points. I can't remember offhand, but this is the amount of power that's actually dropped over that cable run. So you get things like power loss through heat dissipation and resistance over that cable run over 100 meters. So what comes out the actual switch doesn't make it all the way to the actual power device. Obviously, if a power device is a lot closer, if it's 10 meters away, then it will potentially have closer or a higher power budget potentially. But these are really the main standards, and they're divided down into types and also classes as well. So you'll kind of see these things mentioned when you look at the for example, you look at the power settings on the switch. You'll see, for example, the standard and the type and the class being mentioned, and you can specifically set things like the class to override. So normally the PD and the PSE, they'll negotiate how much power is actually required. Sometimes that's not always accurate for various reasons, and so you may need to manually override what class of device is connected to a switch port, for example. So you can do that so it gets higher power allocated to it. Another thing is you may actually want to go the other way. You may know that a device has been allocated, say, 60 watts, but actually it never operates more than using 20 watts, for example. It just, because the device is negotiated a much higher power budget than it actually needs. That's all going to come out your power budget calculation on the switch. A switch is going to have a certain amount of power in its budget that it can actually use, and every device connects to it, it's going to subtract how much it's allocated to that device away from the total budget. So if you've got a lot of devices that have been allocated 60 watts but they actually need 20 or 25 watts, what you can actually do is to specifically set a lower class on those ports so that the power budget is reduced, so you've got more power budget left for other devices. And some of these standards work over 2 pairs or work over 4 pairs, depending on which standard it is. So, typically for multi-gig, you're looking at using 4 copper pairs in the cable rather than 2 copper pairs like the old days there. And we'll look at the different cabling standards very shortly as well. So that's a little bit about sort of the IEEE power. So something that is actually specific to Ruckus that I mentioned earlier is the Ruckus PoE overdrive feature. So this is only on our Ruckus ICX switches, but works in conjunction with the Ruckus APs. And what it's about is when you have a switch, for example, that is negotiated, so using standard LLDP, it's negotiated a lower power budget. So we see in this example, this is looking at the switch CLI. We can see that it's been allocated 30 watts as it's been detected as an AT device. It's been allocated 30 watts. The actual AP is an R720, so it's one of our premium APs, and it requires more power than that to actually drive all the features of it. So what we can see here, but when it's running from a data sheet, when it's running on AT power, and it's getting 30 watts from the PSE, the power sourcing equipment, basically the second Ethernet port and the USB port will be disabled. So that makes it slightly less functional when it's running on a lower power budget. Now, when that's plugged into an ICX switch and by default PoE overdrive is enabled, what will happen is it will actually, it uses another form of LLDP negotiation and discovery. It will actually figure out that actually this device wants more power. It needs more power to actually be fully functional. So what it will do is it will kick in the overdrive feature on that port, and it will automatically allocate more power to it. So we can now see we've got 42 watts allocated to it, and that will actually provide sufficient power for the second Ethernet port and the USB port to actually be operational on that Ruckus AP. So it's a pretty unique feature that standard AT ports can actually provide this PoE overdrive to allocate additional power out the budget to devices, Ruckus devices that need higher power. And that PoE overdrive, as I mentioned earlier, could provide up to 45 watts of power depending on the switch model. So another complicated table, but hopefully it'll be a good reference for you when you look back at this sort of a later time. But predominantly, again, I've kind of picked out the areas that are most important for you. So we're looking at, how many multi-gig ports each of these switches support, and it's the ones that we talked about before. 7450 you can kind of ignore as part of this because whilst it's got high PoE budget, this is more one of the legacy Brocade switches. It doesn't support multi-gig, so really it's only the 7650, the 7550, and the 7150 we're talking about being multi-gig capable. So this tells you how many ports are multi-gig capable, and also tells you about what the maximum sort of high BT power as well, or availability in terms of number of ports there. So handy little reference guide, but it's also kind of handy if you want to look at the overall stats in terms of what the switching capacity is, what the total number of gigabit ports on there are, what the redundancy options are there as well, and what the total PoE budget is. So this will vary based on whether you've got one or two power supplies installed as well. So you may actually only have a fairly low power budget requirement, but you may want redundancy, so you'll install a second power supply, or it may be because you do actually have high power demands that you need to install that second power supply. So the total PoE budget will depend on whether it's one or two power supplies installed, and whether you want resilience or not, or we don't want power supply resilience as well within the switches. So final section is the cabling considerations. Oh, and did I also forget to mention the little quiz earlier as well? I might have forgot to mention that. So that's something to look forward to. So I hope you have been paying attention because there's a little quiz coming up shortly, and it's going to do a little knowledge check to make sure that you have been listening to me.
You just made it even harder, Eddie.
People are quickly scrolling back through the live bar to the previous bits to pick out what might need to be known. Yeah. It's not too difficult. You should be fine. Don't run away. So in terms of Ethernet copper standards, we looked at PoE, IEEE standards. This is related to copper cabling, and this wasn't always the case for some of these. So specifically, again, what I'm doing is I'm taking the 100 meter, which is the kind of the standard that everyone uses to measure PoE and cable distance runs. So we're looking at how far you can drive speeds over copper, and what types of copper up to 100 meters. So, for gigabit connectivity, standard Cat5e, been around since 1999 as part of the .3AB standard. It is absolutely fine. There's no risk whatsoever. So another thing, whilst you may be able to drive some of these, up to 100 meters over, for example, here 2.5 gig. Over Cat5e. So based on the 2016 standard, which is one I was thinking about earlier, 802.3BZ, Cat5e, you can drive that 100 meters at 2.5 gig. However, as we'll see on the next slide, there is actually risk in doing that, depending on the deployment. So whilst it's supported, it doesn't mean it's always going to work. So just be a little bit careful of that one. So 1 gig Cat5e is fine. 2.5 gig Cat5e should be fine in most cases, but ideally you'd want at least Cat6. But today people don't generally put Cat6 in. It's today about Cat6a. Is typically what's being deployed. That's our recommendation. As CommScope, and a company that builds structured cabling, cable and solutions. Cat6a is what you should be putting into future-proof, because that takes you all the way up to 10 gig. So you're completely assured anything from 1 gig to 10 gig. You're completely assured of being able to deliver those speeds without any issues at all. So 2.5 gig Cat5e maybe, but ideally you'd want Cat6 or Cat6a. 5 gig, you need Cat6, but you can run Cat5e with some risk up to 55 meters. 10 gig over copper, you can, or you need to use Cat6a for that. But again, you've got, at risk running Cat6 up to 55 meters. These other standards over copper, not particularly common today, certainly not outside of the data center for connecting servers to switches over a short distance. So you could see, for example, what you could do is to use Cat8 up to 30 meters to run 25 or 40 gig connections to servers within your data centers. So when I talk about risk versus cable length, this is like an assessment of the risk versus cable length, and it's going to depend on how well it's deployed, how many connections there are. It's also going to depend, as I'll talk about on the next slide, about the temperature as well, because that affects performance. So if you're looking at up to 50 meters effectively, 2.5 gig Cat5e, you should be absolutely fine running that. You know, but very, very low risk running 2.5 gig up to 50 meters. Same for Cat6, Cat6a. You know, Cat6a for any speed, you know, is absolutely fine over, you know, any distance up to 100 meters. If we start to look at 5 gig, you can potentially use Cat5e for 5 gig up to 50 meters, but there, you know, there is an increased risk of doing that due to noise. And I don't understand quite all of this because I'm not really a cabling guy. But if you want to go and have a read on Google about it, but obviously it looks like there's a bit more risk in actually doing that. Once you start to go between 50 to 75 meters, and then, you know, those risks increase. So, you know, now Cat5e for 2.5 gig is probably not a good choice, and for 5 gig it's definitely not a good choice. And then once you go down to, you know, 75 to 100 meters, you know, you really shouldn't be using Cat5e for those. Whilst it's supported on, you know, for 2.5 gig, you really shouldn't be using it. You should be using at least Cat6, or, you know, ultimately you should be using Cat6a, especially if you're doing, you know, multi-gig and high PoE budgets. So just to summarize, cabling, Cat5e will support, you know, 2.5 gig. It will support multi-gig, potentially up to 100 meters as part of the 2016 standard, but I wouldn't want to trust to that. You know, Cat6 at least for that, but ideally you want to be running everything on Cat6a is your ideal if you're going to multi-gig and you're driving high PoE budgets. You know, once you're driving past AT standards, you're looking at BT 60 or 90 watts, you should be doing Cat6a cable everywhere. So that's basically what it's saying there. Temperature, which I just mentioned on the previous slide. So this is something that's kind of in cabling designs and deployments will understand all the rules and regulations around cabling. As CommScope, we've got lots of really good guides around this on our website that go through all the details about how you design structured cabling systems, how big the bundles should be, how many cores you can actually, cable cores you can have in a bundle, you know, what spacing you need to have in a bundle, what the bend radiuses are, all that sort of good stuff. But basically, you know, you're probably all familiar with that in terms of like supercomputing. You know, supercomputers run at very low temperatures, you know, sub-zero temperatures, and you know, a superconductor is, I can't remember what it is, minus 256 kelvins or something. It was a long time ago since I went to school, but basically temperature affects performance, and especially in cables it affects performance. So in anything like copper, for example, physical you know, physical conductors, their performance is affected by temperature. And cables are the same. So, you know, cables are baselined at a degree of 20 degrees C in terms of their performance. So, you know, for every degree increase over that baseline in temperature, the performance is going to be degraded. So, you know, whilst you've put that Cat5e cable in, or you've got your existing Cat5e cable and you're running 2.5 gig on it and you've got 6 connections in it, you know, it might kind of work in, you know, on a winter's day when the cables are all pretty cool, but, you know, on a hot summer like we had last year, suddenly you might start to things, you know, you get erratic, you know, data loss and stuff across the network, and it could be related to an increase in temperature. So, you know, be aware of that, and, you know, you've got to be aware that more cables you bundle together, the higher the temperature is going to get, because they all do radiate, especially if you're doing PoE over them, they do radiate temperature, so they're going to heat up. You know, putting large bundles of cables together with no spacing between them, you know, that higher PoE draw that I've mentioned, putting cables into conduit is going to increase, obviously, its temperature. And I think it's something like 40%. You should have at least a 40% air gap in the conduit to allow, you know, sort of air movement within the conduit as well. So just be kind of aware of that as part of your cabling deployments. And, you know, basic things to check for in terms of connectivity for an AP to a switch are things like CRC errors. So, you know, look on the switch ports to see if you've got CRC errors, because they're often indicative of if I can say that, indicative of a cabling problem. The PoE status as well. So, you know, have a look, make sure that the AP, if you've got problems with the AP, you know, on some of our APs, and it depends on your region, if the AP doesn't have enough power, as well as turning off the USB and turning off the second PoE port, which might suddenly happen, you know, so you might have something connected to that port and it gets turned off because there's not enough PoE budget on the switch, or it may be that the transmit radio power has been reduced as well. So in some situations, we'll actually reduce the transmit power on the radios to, you know, if the power budget isn't large enough. So that could affect your coverage. So, you know, it's worth looking at the PoE status on the switches as well if you've got issues with your Wi-Fi, you know, connectivity or coverage. Something else sort of related to power as well. It's kind of interesting this, but if you can actually reduce 1 watt of power usage on an IT device, whether that's your switch or your AP or whatever else it happens to be, that can result in an overall saving in power consumption of 2.8 watts. And that is through the kind of hidden things you don't really think about, because obviously the more power you're using, the more heat you're dissipating. The BTU calculation in your data center, for example. So the more power you're using, the more heat you're dissipating. Something's got to cool that in your data center, and so that cooling comes at a cost of more power, and it's things like that. Reducing the power usage actually improves the efficiency of the actual power distribution systems as well. So anywhere that you can save power is actually a good thing. It actually results in a much bigger actual overall saving in power and therefore costs in running these IT systems and data centers. From a Ruckus perspective, in terms of our switches as well, the designs are very optimized. So, the power supplies are right sized for the particular device. So we don't kind of blanket use the same power supplies across different switch families, or even within, different switches within the same product family. So a PoE version will have a different power supply to it versus the non-PoE version, because non-PoE version doesn't need to have such a big power supply. So, we make sure that the power supply, to help save power, is right sized for the type of application and service that it's providing. And also by providing high switch densities and actually having high PoE budgets per switch compared to some of our competitors, means that we reduce the overall number of switches. So again, reducing the number of overall switches makes the whole power distribution a lot more efficient as well. Right, so it's that time. So as I mentioned, hopefully you have been listening. So well, I don't know if there's a pass mark. I don't know if we've got any prizes even. Should have asked that from Westcon. I don't know if we've got any prizes for this, but no, it's not an individual one. We're just going to do some rankings. So let's move on to the next slide and get the first question up. So you should be able to see this in your chat window. Oh, there should be a link, or you should have had a link to the questions from the portal. And Werner, will that allow me to then move on to that slide, the results, because I can't move on to it currently? I don't know if you can see a different view to me. Yes, there is, but it's not letting me move to it. Yeah, it's not. Oh, there we go. Right. Here we go. So question 1. 10 votes. I'm hoping for a few more votes. Oh, there we go. Got some participants in there, so we're going up. Ruckus PoE overdrive. Now, I don't think I could have stressed the answer to this any more than I did in a couple of places. Oh, change your minds there. Hello. Are they going for the masses? We'll let them settle. Okay, I think that's about the final number for question 1. Yeah, I think we're all settled there for question 1. Yeah, and 54.5% of you. I'm not sure who the 0.5% is. Must be a short fella. The 54%, the correct answer, for Ruckus PoE overdrive could provide up to 45 watts of power. So rather than the standard 30 watts, it can actually push the port much higher depending on the hardware of the switch that it's actually running on. So well done to those that got that correct. So I'm going to move on to question 2. I guess that poll is not running or available just yet. Okay. I'll try moving again, but it's not. So I'm assuming it must be waiting for some answers to come in. Yeah. Right, that's the third. Is that the second or the third question? That's the third question, isn't it? Yeah. It's not kind of letting me get to the second question for some reason. Let me just see if I can. Yeah, I'm gonna come out of the PowerPoint. Let's just see. Oh, it's done that. Right, so it's done that. Let me just go here. It's set that back to question 1 for some reason. Here we go, that's better. Okay, so question 2, which ICX switch families have models that support multi-gig Ethernet? Now, this was a multi-choice question, so I'm assuming it was set up that way. It wasn't an absolute. So there are 3 switch families, but I've again emphasized many times during my presentation that have multi-gig capability. There was one of them I'm glad to see that no one selected at this point, which was in the matrix, but I said hasn't got multi-gig capability. But there were 3 switch families specifically that I talked about in several places that are multi-gig capable. A few more votes cast on this one, interestingly.
Eddie, I can't, on the screen that you're sharing, it just looks to me to be just a blank slide.
Okay, I don't know if that's.
Ah, there we go. Yeah.
Okay, I'm not sure why that's not. Was that the same for the first one, or?
No, the first one was fine. Yeah.
Okay, it's a little bit weird. Okay. Oh, there's a few mind changes going on there. Right, I think we'll do the countdown. Daryl, do you want to do the countdown? Remember the tune? Da-da, da-da, da-da,
yeah.
da-da.
Yeah, I'm not quite as cute as Rachel Riley, but yeah. I think you did the best job there, Eddie.
Right, there you go. I just did it in case you missed it. Da-da, 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 da-da. Boom. Okay. So countdown finished. Okay, we'll take those. So 25% 7650, which would be correct, one of the product families. 7750 at 18.5%. That's one of the legacy Brocade products, which doesn't support multi-gig. 7550, about the same, 18.5%, and that is correct. So that does support multi-gig. That's actually our newest switch product family, recently introduced. 14.8%, that's interesting. We've got sort of ties there as well. So 14.8% said 7150, which is correct. 7850 is our high-end core aggregation or core backbone switch, which doesn't, as such, doesn't support multi-gig access in terms of 1, 2.5, 5, and 10 gig. That's the standard for multi-gig. And then 7250 and 7450 are again legacy Brocade switches that don't support multi-gig. But overall, not too bad there. I think we were fairly close there. And then final question. Which of these standards has the highest PoE budget available? So I'll give you 30 seconds for that one. Got some votes coming in.
Oh dear.
Something again that I mentioned several times as to being the highest PoE budget. Think back to the IEEE standard. There were 3 standards. So we're talking about providing the highest PoE budget. We're talking about a PSE, power sourcing equipment, not a PD. So it's not a powered device. That should give some people a bit of a clue there. Maybe it hasn't. Maybe it's just confused for more.
It's a bit of a trick. It's a bit of, you've got a trick answer almost in there as well. Oh, things are looking up now though. You're giving some good tips.
Yeah.
Oh, that or Google's getting hammered.
Right. Boing. There we go. We'll call it that. Well done. 88% of you correctly got BT. Yep, that's the highest power specification that was formed of UPoE and POH. So provides 60 or 90 watts of power. AX is a PD device, so I was trying to wean people away from that one. So that is the standard for Wi-Fi 6, which is effectively going to be a PD, and AF was the previous standard, which was 30 watts.
Well, also it's not .3AX either, is it?
No, it's not. So it's not even kind of correct in terms of its terminology. So
yeah.
Yep. Well spotted that. I hadn't even, when I wrote the question, I hadn't even spotted that I'd put that in, just following the standard. Right, so going back, we're on the home straight. Let's see how we're doing for time. Not too bad, I think. A little bit over perhaps from where I wanted to be. But so the last part of this, as I said, in a live session, what we'd have actually done is to do live labs with this. So I've just done a bit of a cut down sort of version of the labs, giving you some screenshots just to kind of see what the interaction, whether you're working with multi-gig and PoE on the switches using the CLI, or if you're using our smart zone controller, for example, to manage your switches. But you can do all the configurations and the monitoring through both of those platforms. Obviously, this doing this in real life is a lot more interesting than kind of watching some screenshots of it. And of course, the other thing as well, I could have gone and borrowed a ZP switch with high power to do this, and an AP that I don't have at home to do it. I could have gone to the office and borrowed some. But as they say, never do live demonstrations or work with kids or animals. So I thought better to have some screenshots, and hopefully they won't fail me. Unlike the quiz did a little bit there. So in terms of this real virtual lab setup that I used here, we've got an R720 AP, so it's a Wi-Fi 5 AP, but premium AP that requires high power. So I've stuck with that for the lab because that's what we referenced before about features being turned off if it didn't have sufficient power budget from the switch. And we're just looking at the 7150 C10ZP, so the 10-port switch, which is multi-gig and high power capabilities on it as well. So as we saw, it's got 6 ports there that can provide 2.5 gig E. It could provide PoE overdrive on mobile rather than just PoE plus. It can do the 45 watts of PoE overdrive to provide the AP with more power if it's plugged into one of those ports. Got the 2.5 gig ports and also the multi-gig 1, 2.5, 5, 10 gig ports there, as well as the uplinks. And just from the data sheet, a bit fuller from what we saw before, but this gives you from the data sheet for the 720, it tells you about what features will actually be disabled if you don't have sufficient power to that powered device. So we use original AF power, which is just 12.95 watts. Sorry, that's the actual consumption. That is the same. Actually, that is the PD power. That is the PD power of the device. So it's 15 watts at the PSE and 12.95 watts at the PD. So in this case, let me just get my laser pointer out. So in this case, you can see the radios. They may have the transmit power. So they've got their transmit power reduced. And they've also got the number of radio chains. The actual number of radio chains is actually reduced as well. So as I mentioned on the previous kind of slide, when you're troubleshooting issues, reduced coverage and performance in a Wi-Fi network could be down to having insufficient PoE budget, because for higher power APs, things will get turned down. We can also see that the second Ethernet port and the USB port are disabled in that case. If you use PoE Plus or 802.3 AT, you've got a higher power budget. It's 30 watts at the PSE and 25.5 watts at the PD. So we've got all the radio streams, but the transmit power is still reduced. And the Ethernet port and the USB port for IoT is also still disabled. So it's not until you go to higher specification POH or UPoE there, maybe using a PoE injector or 48 volts DC, so you can put 48 volts DC into the AP as well to power it, rather than using PoE over data cable. All the APs actually have a DC connector on them, so it may be, depending on the AP, 12 or 48 volts, rather than powering it via PoE. So you see here, you've got all radio chains, they're running at full power, and also you've got the second Ethernet port and USB port are no longer disabled as well. So once you're providing sufficient power, then the AP will enable all of its functionality. So we connected that AP up to that switch port. So just in terms of ICX, these are known as modules. So the ports go into modules. So this is all module 1, these ports. These 2 ports are module 2, or slot 2 if you want to call them that. And these 2 ports are slot or module 3 within there. And because you can stack them, the way that we actually define ports, the first number is which switch in a stack is it? Is it switch number 1, switch number 2, all the way up to switch 12? So if you want to address a switch directly within a stack, you use its stack ID effectively. The second one is which slot within the switch itself, or which module within the switch, and then the actual port. So 121 is effectively its module. So it's stack unit 1, because there's no other units in this stack. It's module 2, which is this one, and it's port 1. So this will be 122. This is 121. This will be 131 and 132 there. So just that's how our port numbering works. So what we've done is we connected the AP up, and what we're doing is we're using a command in the CLI for switch called show inline power. So this will give you the total power capacity for the switch. And if you remember back, this has 240 watts power budget through its built-in power supply. And it's currently got 180 watts free there. And this is just about power allocations. And then we can see the detail for each of the switch ports. So you can see the slots and the switch ports, and you can see how much power is actually being currently consumed. So we've got this AP plugged into port 121. It's currently consuming 8.4 watts of power, but it's actually been allocated 60 watts of power. So whilst it's been detected as an AT class 4, it is a AT device. It's actually class 4 device, which means it's effectively BT. So it's getting the higher power up to 60 watts being allocated. So whilst it's not using it all, that's what it's actually been allocated. So all the features on the AP will currently be functional, and there'll be no reduction in RF chains or in transmit power either. But obviously that takes a bit of a hit out the total power budget there. So another command we can actually do there is to show the interface status. So we've looked at PoE. Now let's look at the multi-gig capabilities. So if we do show interface E for Ethernet, and again the same port, so it's unit 1 in the stack, slot 2, port 1. What we actually see there is some information. You can get more detailed information and statistics. Obviously, this is just a bit of a summary here that I've shown, but it actually shows you that port is capable of 10 gigabits per second. So if we just go back to the actual picture, these ports here are 1 gig, 2.5 gig ports. These two are 1 gig, 2.5 gig ports as well, and this one here is 1, 2.5, 5, and 10 gig capability. So it's showing you that the hardware, the port is capable of doing 10 gig, but through auto negotiation, because the AP has a 2.5 gig port on it, it's negotiated down to 2.5 gigabits per second. So we can see auto negotiation working correctly as it should there. But let's take a look at PoE overdrive. So what we're going to do is we're going to move the AP from port 1 or port 8 effectively to port 1. So port 1 has got a lower PoE budget on it, so it's 802.380, but it's got that PoE overdrive feature. So initially the AP, whilst it's still only consuming 8.4 watts of power, initially it would have been allocated 30 watts, and then PoE overdrive would have kicked in and provided potentially up to 45 watts of power. So you can see here it's actually allocated now 42 watts of power. So that's again, another view of PoE overdrive in action there, and we can see obviously the overall used power budget is now less. So it makes things in terms of, as I mentioned earlier, being able to change things like the class, which we'll see in a moment. You can actually reduce the amount of power that's automatically being allocated. But we can see there that PoE overdrive is working, and because it's got enough power for that R720, again, all the features will actually be working on it. The USB port will be enabled, as will the second Ethernet port as well. And just in terms of comparison, this is when it was connected to port 8. We could see how much power budget was left connected to port 8 when it got 60 watts. It was 180 watts left, and now we've actually got 197 watts left. So we've got more available power left to use across the other ports for devices. So what I can actually do is to change the power class for that particular port. So we're staying on the same port 1 there. What I'm actually going to do is I'm going to change it to the original AF standard, which is 15.4 watts. So we can see here the switch is allocating 15.4 watts. There's no difference in the power consumption. So whilst the AP could potentially require 20 or 30 watts to drive all its features, because the AP hasn't actually got its radios broadcasting any SSIDs. Nothing's connected to the second Ethernet port. It doesn't have a USB dongle in it. You know, in all these cases, the actual power consumption is very low compared to what it may actually be consuming. So they'd be kind of fooled that looks very, very low. The AP actually isn't really doing anything or driving anything. But you see there, I've actually, you know, changed it down, and note it still shows as class 4. That's because it doesn't actually change it in this display. The only place that you can see the class has been changed is to actually go and look at the configuration itself. So do like a show run to see the running configuration to actually see that this port has been configured as class 3. So that can be a little bit misleading sometimes looking at the class here, because it doesn't actually reflect what's in the configuration. I'm not sure why it's done that way, but that's kind of the way it is. I think it's showing what's actually negotiated as opposed to what's configured here. But you can see via the allocated budget, that is you know, that is reduced down to AF by changing the class, by changing it to class 3, which is AF power there. So we can see that, and what effect that's going to have on the AP itself, because it hasn't got sufficient power. It's going to turn down the number of transmit radios or transmit streams. It's going to reduce the transmit power. It's going to turn off the USB port, and it's also going to disable the second Ethernet port as well. So if you're doing that in the lab, you could actually, you know, see that in real life by having a second device connected to the Ethernet port. So we can also change the Ethernet speed. As we saw before, if you want to set it manually, you can override the auto negotiation. So we saw before, you know, like it auto negotiates correctly. We're now on a 2.5 gig port because we're in port 1 rather than the 10 gig capable port, but it's still auto negotiated correctly. Maybe I want to set this for some reason to 1 gig, so I can use the speed command to set the speed and duplex for the port. So I'll set it to 1 gig here, and we can actually see whilst the hardware is 2.5 gig capable, the port is actually now set to 1 gigabit per second. So again, you can, you know, change speed as well quite simply through the CLI. If we now look at the SmartZone web UI itself, you can really do all the same things that you can do via the CLI of a switch. So if you're managing your switches in the SmartZone, or you're managing them in Ruckus Cloud, for example, or Unleashed, you don't get so many options for management in Unleashed today, but we are adding them in future versions, adding some more management for switches on Unleashed. But in terms of SmartZone, you know, there is a lot of configuration and control and visibility you actually get for switches in there. So what we can see here, we've got the switch. So the switch itself is still connected to port 111. So the port it was, the 2.5 gig port. We can see that the actual power that's being consumed is still the same, the 8.4 watts. And here we can actually see we've gone back. So we've turned off the power class, or I can't remember before the power class was changed. So you can see that it's drawing the it's actually budgeted to use up to 42 watts there. So you see the same information as using that show inline power command on the CLI. If I actually select the port, so click on it to select it and then click the configure button, I can actually go in and do configurations of that port as well. So that's what I'm going to do now. So if I go in there, it'll bring up the port configuration dialog box. I can change here, for example, the PoE class if I want to. I can give, you know, the port name. I can set VLANs, tagged, non-tagged VLANs on the port here. So as source said, its PoE class is one of the things we're interested in here as part of this lab. You can also set PoE priority. So this is where you actually want to prioritize PoE budget to certain ports. So with the switches running out of power budget, as you add devices to it, you can actually set a higher priority for certain ports. So those devices actually get prioritized in terms of power if the budget drops too low. So a low priority device is the one that will actually have power removed from it in preference to a high priority PoE device. So you can also do access control list. Then the other one here you can do is to change the port speed. So, you know, set to auto works very well. Or if you want to, you can physically set it to, you know, your 1 gig or whatever else you want to set it to, as well as the duplex mode there. So, you know, again, pretty simple. And just a little mention here, what you can actually do is to do show run to look at the running configuration if you want to actually see the changes on the switch itself that you've made through the SmartZone graphical user interface. And then what you can actually do, if we look at access points rather than the switches, so we've moved from the switch context to the access point context here. So we've got our access points that are connected to this system. So if I select the access point and configure it, what I can actually do is to go and override some of the access point specific settings for that model. So for each model, what you can actually do is go and override the sort of a global default settings if you want to for a particular AP. So if I go down to here, down to the AP configuration, select model specific controls and enable this to override it. And then I can actually set some of these specific controls on that particular AP model. So you see the AP model is VR720. So if, for example, I wanted to specifically turn the USB port off, I could turn that off here. I could turn LLDP discovery off if I wanted to, or change the parameters. I can change or turn the AP LEDs off here. And then I can also manually set the PoE operating mode. So if, for example, I wanted to reduce the budget for this switch specifically, to say that, rather than the switch allocating it, sort of what it's expecting, maybe 30 watts or 45 watts or 60 watts, as we saw when it was connected to port 8. Maybe I want to specify that actually I don't care about the Ethernet port being disabled and the USB port being disabled. What I can actually do is to set this, for example, to a lower power class like we did through the CLI, or set it to a lower operating mode like AF or AT to actually reduce the power budget that is required from the switch. So there's you can do it at the AP, or you can do it with a switch. Our recommendation is generally to do any of these sort of configurations in terms of PoE configuration, actually do that on the switch rather than the AP itself. So this is where we can see here we've got the USB port disabled. We've changed the power operating mode to AF, and obviously that will mean that some things by default, in fact I think this has probably turned itself off by default, because the USB port, if you change it to a lower power operating mode than it requires, it will actually automatically turn off the USB port. It will also automatically turn off the LAN port. So this here again is a little bit subliminal. So when this is the second LAN port, it looks like it's still on, but actually it will be turned off. So operationally, it won't function. This is actually the administrative control of that LAN port. So I can turn the LAN port on and off, but changing the mode and not having enough power, if the AP switches off automatically, it doesn't turn it off here. It still looks like it's on. So just be a little bit careful if you are ever playing with these settings. And that's all from me. So probably a good time now. Thank you very much for listening and taking part in that little quiz there. Hope you enjoyed that. A little breakout there. So I think at this point in time, what we're going to do is to stop sharing and have a look and see if there are any questions.
Absolutely none, Eddie. I'm afraid there's you must have covered absolutely everything that could have possibly been covered.
Or okay. We'll give it a couple of minutes, because sometimes people are a little bit shy, don't want to ask their questions.
I've got a quick question, Eddie.
Oh no, you'll ask me a difficult one, Daryl.
No, it's not.
You're not allowed to ask questions.
No, it's not. The first one's really easy and a bit embarrassing for me. Is, did you cover LLDP?
Not really. No. So I sort of mentioned it as in that's the mechanism used for negotiating PoE, but it wasn't really covered in this presentation. But yes, yeah, just to point that out again, that is the mechanism that's used. And for PoE overdrive, I think we use LLDP med or something for negotiating PoE overdrive, as I remember, or something like that. It was a slightly different acronym to straight LLDP.
So great, thank you. So I'll ask you a loaded question then. So with the Ruckus Better Together story of APs, Ruckus APs and Ruckus switches, are there any benefits around using those together from a PoE perspective? I mean,
in terms of PoE, primarily is if you have a requirement to use PoE overdrive. That's really the key kind of benefit, because that is proprietary to Ruckus, the ability to deliver higher power on a standard sort of AT port, 802.3 AT port, up to 45 watts. That's really our key one, where you may have an existing customer that is moving up to higher specification APs or to Wi-Fi 6 APs, and they won't necessarily need to replace their switches, because if they've already got the ICX switches that support PoE overdrive, they are, maybe a 24 or 48 port 802.3 AT switch, then they'll have PoE overdrive on some of those switches, which they can use to drive the higher power, devices that are connecting to them. So that's really the key benefit. Obviously, from a management perspective, better together means that, being able to manage your switches and your APs from the same single pane of glass effectively is obviously going to provide significant benefit in terms of configuration management, monitoring and troubleshooting of the switched and the Wi-Fi network. From a commercial perspective, obviously we'd hope that in terms of, I mentioned very early on, price per kind of port, price per Wi-Fi user. You'd hope that if a customer is buying Ruckus APs and Ruckus switches as a solution, and Ruckus controller as a solution, but they're going to get a better deal than certainly going to different vendors for those components as well. So I think that's really the key kind of points about, not just from a PoE perspective, but obviously buying from a single vendor.
That's brilliant.
And, supportability as well. It's not, you go away from the blame game. You've got HP switches, and you've got, your Ruckus APs connected to them. There's some issues, we're going to say it's to do with the HP switches. HP are going to say it's to do with the APs. You get away from that kind of blame game as well. Single point of support contact.
Brilliant, thank you. I think our American friends say a single throat to choke.
Yeah, yes, that's the one. Yes.
Brilliant, thank you.
Right, well, I'm guessing that some people are leaving and there are no questions. So I guess at that point we can wrap it up. So we'll say thank you very much for taking the time to join. Hope you found it informative and useful. And again, thank you very much to our co-hosts, Westcon, for giving us the chance to present the Ruckus solutions for multi-gig and PoE as well. We look forward to potentially meeting with some of the partners and working on some projects with you as well. So hopefully it's given you a good insight into the product families and the capabilities of the products as well. And myself, Daryl, and the other SCs are here to help work with Westcon and the partners in order to provide you those pre-sale service and support for for your end user customers and yourselves as well. So Lee is typing. I don't suspect he has a question. We'll see.
No question. Thank you very much, guys. I'm going to save the recording in the chat window so everyone can have a look at that. And so great. Cheers, guys.
Great. Okay. Thanks very much.
Thanks very much.
Stay safe. And of course, have a great Xmas. It's not a couple of weeks or so away now. So enjoy your Christmas and your New Year breaks.
Cheers, guys.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.